live if someone doesn't mind just doing introductions.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Janet McMahon and a member of the Sylvania Redevelopment Committee.
I'm Jan Griesenbrock, member of the committee.
Mike Thayer, likewise.
Gail Hunt.
Mark Eckert.
Carl Solberg.
Bob Butler.
And I'm Max Johnstone from the planning department. Julie is not going to be with us today. She has an appointment. So today on the agenda, because of some time restrictions, I'd like to ask the committee to allow our guest, Danny from Sundog Solar, to start his discussion on the potential for a solar farm for the site. Any objections?
Go for it.
All right. So Danny, do you mind just giving us a bit of an introduction and just explaining the solar industry right now?
Sure, yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Danny Piper from Sundog Solar. Good to meet you all. Bob, good to see you. It's been a little while. But Max invited me in on the conversation just because I know there's been a lot of talk of developing the Sylvania site into a solar array. And I think that the conversation that Max and I had kind of pretty quickly was about the capacity at the substation in Waldoboro, which essentially is there is no capacity left there. There's a lot of projects in line at this point that are going to be built and or already built, and so they are going to have to upgrade the substation in order to have any more solar built behind that substation. So that's pretty much the short of it. You guys have any questions about that?
Yeah. What is the load downstream of the substation? Is this just a question of peak power and not having enough capacity to get the electricity onto the grid?
So it's kind of so I had a pre-application report that I got back maybe 2 weeks ago for a business down in Bremen, and that business is on the Waldoboro substation on circuit 252D2, which there's 2 circuits out of the Waldoboro substation, and that's one of them. And that report basically showed me that a couple things. One is that the substation total capacity is 7.42 MVA. So it's a 7.42 megawatt substation. So it's not actually very large compared to others. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that the report showed me is that they were saying that the substation peak load is 6.23 MVA. So basically 6.23 megavolt amps is what that stands for. But, so it's slightly under what the substation capacity is. So there's still capacity within the substation to feed more load. But because the solar, there's more generation capacity than there is within the substation. That's what is triggering that substation to need to be upgraded. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but
a couple of things. This is on the load side, the low voltage side of the substation that this power is going on. Yeah. Isn't it just displacing load locally? And when the solar farm is creating electricity, it's being used locally, and there's not actually power going through the substation onto the grid. So I'm trying to understand why serving the loads on the low voltage side affects the substation. I just don't understand that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think a a lot of it is that, they have to look at the extremes in the kind of technical review process of interconnecting a solar array. So, they're looking at what the minimum load is on the circuit and what the maximum generation would look like. So if there was an event where, you had your lowest amount of load and your maximum amount of generation happening, there's concerns within that around what the voltage would do out of the substation. So there's concerns about the power quality, basically, when you start to get a lot of generation into the circuit. So that's one of the concerns that is part of the interconnection process. And then I think the biggest concern is really that there is not more solar than there is substation capacity in case of a minimum load event and all of that generation needing to be exported through the substation back to the transmission line. And so
Well, I suppose an event that occurs, a power pole gets knocked down, knocks out the load on one of those legs, and the solar farm is still generating more electricity. Where does that electricity go?
Pretty much, that's really the concern, is that if there's not if the conduit is not big enough to support what's flowing through it, then we're going to have an explosion, So it
But
basically,
we don't want a transformer to explode, for sure.
yeah, it would be more than a transformer. It'd be this whole substation. So it would be,
I thought that, sorry if I may, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but I thought that solar arrays were designed to cut down, to shut off if there were an incident like the one you're talking about. They simply disengage.
yeah, I mean, if there was if there was an event that caused an irregularity in the quality of the power, either the voltage or the frequency, it would disengage, because the inverter, the grid, the utility is required to operate within a certain range of power quality, and the inverters operate within an even tighter range. So they do shut down, just like you said, if there's a power quality problem. But it could be that there is no power quality problem. It's just that there's a lot of generation and very little load. And if you have more generation than the substation can handle, and there's not enough load to soak up that extra power, you have that same issue where you're choked by the substation. You can't export all of that power in that event. So overloading the substation, I don't actually know myself how much you can do of that. I'm sure there's some percentage or ratio that the utility knows is some safe limit, but they don't overload them at all. So I mean, if there's more PV generation applying to the substation than what the substation is sized for. So in this case, in Waldoboro right now, again, the substation is 7.42 MVA, and there's right now there's allocated capacity is 7.98. So it's actually slightly over that what the substation can handle as is. And there's actually queued capacity as well. So there's like 2 MVA of queued capacity. So that tells me that there's a project that's in line, and they may be entertaining a substation upgrade. I don't know that for sure. But the fact that there's capacity still in the queue, it could be that they're waiting to see if another project drops out before they pull themselves out of the queue. Or it could be that they're waiting to see what the cost of a substation upgrade would look like, and how that cost could be shared amongst the projects.
Can you give us an idea as to technically what part of the substation is limiting? Is it the high voltage lines coming into the substation? Is it the transformer in the substation? Or
It's,
is it the low voltage side?
I would think it's likely the transformer in the substation itself. That's the limitation.
Oh, I kind of thought that might be the case, and there are very modest improvements you can make to a transformer to have them have adequate capacity, such as adding fans to the cooling fins on the transformer.
Yeah,
We've done that in projects ourselves. Is that something that's, well, you might not know what's in
I don't know,
main power's
honestly.
mind, but is that something that they normally do?
Well, don't know that they make modest modifications like that. If there's a, substation upgrade, I don't know that it's a minimal upgrade. From what I'm understanding and hearing is it's millions of dollars to upgrade the substation. Whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 million, I don't know, but it's millions of dollars. And I don't know if they're completely changing. I think for them, to make a small modification to try to get 1 more megawatt through there or something, it's not quite worth it. So if they're going to have upgrades, they're going to upgrade to in a way that allows for future, capacity as well, which I think makes sense, just because, back when they built that substation, they probably never thought we'd be at this point where now we need to upgrade it again, So it makes sense to be looking forward like that. But what is entailed with the substation upgrade, I think it's different at every single site. And there's, they literally study it, they have several different studies that have to be done on every one of these PV systems that interconnect, and including what they call cluster studies, where they study how many systems attached to a single substation and what that effect will look like at that substation, as well as what it'll look like on the transmission line. And so some of the projects are also needing to get ISO New England approval, which is more on the transmission side of it. Yes, Bob.
I'm hearing there's a load issue and there's a generation issue. On the generation side, wouldn't one solution, if these new solar panels are producing so much more than the network can use, isn't one solution to simply store that?
That could be a solution.
Are they looking at that? Or would they look at that?
No. The utility, so the utility really has no incentive to get a battery that I am aware of at this point for the grid. For them to manage that, there's certainly some battery projects that are coming online. But no, I don't think that the utility is planning that at this point. They're not really working, renewables or storage into their equation. Yes.
You talked about cost, and it sounds like CMP would pass that cost onto the project or projects that are adding the incremental generation to the system.
That's right.
At what point does it become CMP's responsibility to pay for that increase?
That's a good question. And that's legislatively what is needing to be figured out at this point, because this problem dives much deeper than large scale project development. It's now diving into residential project development.
Yeah.
So it's a real issue, and it's not CMP's responsibility. It ends up being our responsibility as the ratepayers. And that's legislatively what is the holdup, because the argument for years has been, well, the solar folks are, saving money while everybody else is absorbing the added expense of the grid. So the folks that can't afford solar are paying for, you know, to hold up the grid while everybody else is saving money. That's been the argument for years. And, you know, there's a good argument there. It doesn't take into account, you know, all of the positive things that solar does provide to the grid, like grid infrastructure, you know, reduction, which is a nice example on the Booth Bay Peninsula project. So there's, you know, it's pretty complicated stuff, but that cost, you know, sharing the cost of grid infrastructure upgrades for solar is a legislative question at this point. If the people in the state of Maine want to keep building solar and the state wants to keep supporting renewable energy growth, there has to be a realization that the cost is going to have to get shared amongst ratepayers to upgrade the grid. Because at this point, they're trying to just have all of the grid infrastructure upgrade expenses be on the cost of the projects. And it works for a lot of projects. There's a lot of projects can afford, you know, a couple $100,000 worth of grid upgrades. But there's examples like we have a project in Bar Harbor that it's in Northeast Harbor, I guess. And that project just got shut down altogether. It's a residential, like 50 something kW system. And they aren't going to let it interconnect at all because they're saying that the project is going to overpower the grid essentially. And that in order to overcome that, there would have to be like a $300,000 to $500,000 line upgrade. And one single 50 kW residential project can't support that expense. So this is like really starting to happen at a smaller scale level versus even just large scale projects. So yeah, it's a legislative issue at this point. It's got to get resolved there, and there is conversation about it at this point. I'm not really fully up to speed, to be honest with you, on how much conversation, but I do know that there's some action happening around this exact issue.
Janet, were you about to ask?
Yeah, I was curious that if a substation, ours is upgraded, how long that takes? And if someone is going to upgrade it, you said they might allow for extra capacity so other projects can come in, and then it would be up to them to charge any new installments or installations, or how would that work?
Yeah, there is some, I'm, you know, well, for one, I'll just tell you, I'm not, you know, my business model is not just large scale project development. So I'm not probably up to speed as much as some of the larger scale developers. For instance, like, I don't know how the cost sharing actually is allocated, but there is cost sharing. And usually the first project in line takes all the expense, and then I think there's some method of either paying that back, or if other projects come along within the time frame, then the cost gets split that way. I'm not 100% sure how they do it, but yeah, that's the idea, that, you know, the cost is shared that way amongst all the projects.
And how long does it take to upgrade a substation? Years or months?
Well, so we actually have a substation right across the street from my building here in Searsport, and I observed that substation being upgraded, and I think it probably took them close to a year to upgrade the substation. Took quite a while.
One final question, if I might.
Sure.
There's little wiggle room, about a megawatt, maybe 1.2 megawatts of capacity versus peak load.
Yeah.
That's not a lot for town growth either. If we were to get a major user of electricity,
Right.
Is it a limit on town growth? Can we lobby the state for an upgrade based on, you know, say a medical building to be built in Waldoboro?
Yeah, It's a good question. I don't know. I'm not sure if there was more load that got added and that caused an issue with the substation, then that would be an expense that they would cover. And I mean, ultimately, us as ratepayers would be covering that expense, but they would allocate funds for that. But you know, that again, that process is not a quick one. It's, you know, multi-year type of process. So I don't know. I don't know enough about the whole thing to know what, you know, how they plan for that kind of thing. And if, you know, if a medical building were to go in and they applied, if at that point they would plan it, you know, figure out the planning process, then I really don't know how that would go, but I just know that, you know, whenever load increases, that cost is, you know, not a cost that cost is covered by the utility. And if there's a solar project that's causing infrastructure upgrade, then it's a cost that's, you know, on the developer or the, you know, residential homeowner or the business owner as well. So
Are there any other
I don't know.
questions?
I'm not really even sure if you could, I mean, you might be able to reach out from a town perspective and ask these questions and just kind of ask, you know, hey, you know, we recognize that the substation is at a capacity for solar projects, and we're more or less concerned about, you know, the capacity of the substation for future development and growth. And just ask them what their thoughts are on it. You might be able to find out, you know, a better idea from the utility on how much time they think there is before that has to happen.
Are there any other questions for Danny or? Just one more.
Is it better to approach the PUC on an issue like that, or is it better to go to CMP directly?
You know, I mean, the PUC is definitely, you know, obviously a good advocate, but there'd be more if there was like a real direct issue, you know, versus just inquiring about what is or what could be. I think probably starting with CMP is your best bet, honestly. And then if you're not getting straight answers, then you can, you know, bring it to the PUC at that point. But I think if you start to call CMP, they would start to give you quite a bit of information. I mean, there's been, this is not unique, you know, this is happening in a lot of different substations around the state. And there's a lot of knowledge and information about the whole thing with, you know, directed by CMP. So they're willing to share quite a bit. So they may even tell you like, hey, there's a project that's moving forward and there's a planned upgrade here. And if that's the case, then that might shed light into, you know, what to do. Maybe apply for another project to see if that can get into the study before the planned upgrade. So they upgrade it even more. I don't know, you know. But I think that would be your best bet, is to start right there with them. And I mean, obviously with a grain of salt, because they're not excited about new solar projects going in at this point. So might not want to come from that angle, but.
Sorry, that's one more.
Unless there's anyone else, Bob?
Electricity rates have gone up a lot this year. I mean, ours have gone from 16 cents to 22 cents.
Yes.
I would imagine that most of that incremental addition is an anticipation of future requirements, not to cover existing requirements. Is that a fair statement? In other words, already built into their rate increase, the financing or some of the financing they're going to need to increase the overall capacity of what they have here.
I don't know that that's part of the cost increase. I think it has more to do with the electrical supply. I don't really think it has anything to do with the delivery or the transmission at all. I think it,
Delivery's gone up a lot.
well, you're right, it has gone up on both sides, but I think that the majority of the expense has gone up on the supply side of the bill. So I'm pretty sure like that went up almost 80% on the supply side, or it was like, I think it was 80%, somewhere right around there. Overall, between supply and delivery, I think it's gone up 35%, something like that, somewhere in that range. So it may have gone up a little bit, 10% or so on the delivery side, but I think the majority of it is on that supply side, and that has to do with the cost of, the cost of fossil fuels being high right now worldwide.
Well, that's the irony, because CMP is about the delivery side and they're not pro solar, and we need to expand the supply side, which is solar. So I guess I can see why
Right, it's not
state
a
needs
lot
to
of
get involved,
incentive.
because CMP has no incentive, it's,
Exactly, I know.
so
Yeah,
it's a conundrum. That's why I'm curious about the timing, or even at the legislative, if there are any legislative shifts, because we're up against the wall here and CMP is not going to go to bat for this, I'm sure. So yeah,
no, no, and I mean, it's even more, this is a concern for this one project, right? But I mean, if you think about all of the residences that and small businesses that don't have solar in that area, I mean, there's a business that applied, that we sent a pre-application in for, and that business can't move forward. So there's a real restriction, and I don't honestly understand what is needed in order to allow for all of the solar that should be generated. Part of it is that part of it is definitely that they are pretty conservative around how much power they'll process through existing infrastructure in the name of reliability, essentially safety and reliability. But so I don't have enough engineering experience to know exactly how conservative they're being around it. I know just from some of our own projects that we've kind of had to go up to bat on, that it's pretty conservative. But when you look at numbers like how much power there is behind a substation, it doesn't, there's real physics there, in that you can't, if you had an event where the load is very low and there's very high generation, you just can't have an event. It would be a massive problem to have that substation go down because a solar generator blew it up, so they don't allow for that event to happen. So they're pretty conservative, and just the whole thing.
Any other questions, or looking at Bob for a second?
Do you know of any other municipalities that are hitting this wall, or are the cases that you're talking about all instances of a residential project or a specific business coming up against this barrier?
So we've hit this wall in a few places. We hit it, let's see, last year or year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I guess it was, at a business down in Gardner, I think it was. So that was the first time we ran into it, and that was a small one. It was like 30 some odd kW AC. And then we ran into that same issue again in Ellsworth. So Ellsworth, we had a business there that applied for 60 kW and got shut down there. But so there's kind of, there's rules within the law, and there's kind of a lot of room to move within those rules, within the overarching law. And one of the things is that if a project level 1 or level 2 project applies before there's actually allocated capacity on the grid, so working projects on the grid, they technically should be in line before any of the queued capacity. And so most of the queued capacity is all level 4 projects, which are anything over 2 megawatts. Typically, sometimes it's under that. Like I know there's some right now that are actually in the Waldorf queue that are, I think, 1.2 megawatt. So depends on the size and some of the variables, whether the utility lets it track as a level 2, or if it's under 2 megawatts, or if they bump it, up to a level 4. Yeah, so what was the question though? Sorry, I drew a blank there.
This is a common, if Waldeboro is a unique instance, or if
Oh,
there's
right.
other towns that hit this, but this
Yeah.
sounds like this is a state.
So Ellsworth, we ran into the issue there, and they ended up letting us move that project forward. It took a lot of legal dollars to make it happen, but that project moved forward, but they still are having a capacity issue at this point on the substation there. So I don't think there's a lot more growth on that substation. So, and then again, this happened in Northeast Harbor. That one there doesn't have to do with the substation. It has to do with the circuit itself. Like the wires are too small.
So it is 5:10. I know that you have some commitments in a bit, Danny, so we don't want to hold you forever. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us?
Well, I mean, it's a good conversation. I appreciate you guys thinking about it, and it's making, it's getting me a little more present to that. I should be probably finding out a few more of these answers just for my own self, and that, I'm definitely concerned with, if we're heading for a cliff, just from an industry growth perspective. We've been shut down in the state here on a few different occasions, and solar development is not, it's hard enough to get a contract with a host or with a customer, and so then when you get to the next step of applying and there's no more capacity anywhere, it starts to get concerning, and it's concerning from a resident standpoint, people that live here. If we can't have access to renewable energy, then what do we do? So it's big questions, and it's definitely what I see across the board, and the whole thing is just that we're gonna have to spend money as ratepayers on grid infrastructure, which means that the price of electricity is going to go up in order to be able to build more renewables. So,
Well, does anyone have any final questions, comments? Danny, thank you for speaking with us today. We really appreciate you giving some insight on this. We'll let you go.
yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot for having me, and I'd be
Thank
happy.
you for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have anything a little more conclusive for you guys, but be happy to talk more about it, if there's more questions that come up over time. So just let me know. Okay. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Does anyone have any thoughts after that discussion?
I do have a thought, and I'm just wondering whether we shouldn't have to be having the same discussion with the Economic Development Committee.
About upgrading the capacity?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
what would the discussion, what do you envision being discussed?
well, I envision them, and that's not that this committee couldn't do the same thing, but maybe it's a joint committee thing, that we raise the issue and recommend to the town that they get involved in this conversation and start taking steps with CMP to do what needs to be done to make sure we have future capacity here to grow. I mean, Danny talked about large businesses coming on stream, but other than the Unagi plant up there in the industrial, in the business park. I don't know of any big ones like that that are coming down the pike, and I don't even sure how big that is. But if we want to do projects like the medical center or
The community center.
even veterans, even Volunteers of America, that project. Are we pushing the envelope on them? Or are we going to count ourselves out because we don't have capacity here? I think we need to talk about that.
I believe the EDC is meeting tomorrow. and
Yeah.
So we'll bring that up during the discussion
Okay.
tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd personally like to get a sense on what is going on in Augusta around this. The problem is when politics change, so who knows, but so there's some time frame issue because I imagine most towns, at least in the parts of the state that are developing fairly quickly, are gonna have to run against this very problem. So there's gotta be a fix.
And your point was so well taken. I mean, if the problem is generation and the prices are going up because it's expensive to buy fossil fuels, well, hello.
And CFP's never been a proponent of solar. As a matter of fact, they've been the exact opposite. So it's an issue. So I'm hoping in Augusta, I mean, I honestly like the thought of talking to someone at PUC eventually, or someone who's working on that angle.
Oh, I don't know. They've seemed to be very friendly in the past, right, Bob? How did that landfill project go?
No comment.
Well, that's just not, they don't make any money.
No.
Transmission is, it's business decision, but the irony though is Iberdrola, which is their parent company, is the leading solar provider in Europe. I mean, they do a lot with solar there, but for some reason in Maine,
Even our neighbor Vermont, their utility is doing stuff with solar.
I imagine there's going to be a lot of changes, which for me, I wouldn't even take solar off the table. That's why I'm interested in the time frame. I feel like it might mean that we wait, some of our decisions wait on some of the site to allow that to happen potentially. But anyway, that's down the road.
That gives us a pressure point.
Part of Danny's discussion was from the last meeting we had where we went through all the uses and this idea we had to pick something immediately.
Yeah.
That's not the case. We can certainly wait. We can do the nothing option and
Or one thing and wait for something.
do the passive items and just when the time comes, we can then spring on this item.
Okay, thank you for arranging.
So that's that for that topic. Just going through the agenda items from the top, adjustments to the agenda, we've gone through that. Citizens' comments, there's no one in the meeting room, and I don't see anyone on YouTube. The March 7th, 2022 minutes, I assume everyone read those very diligently and have their thoughts on it.
I read them and I thought they were accurate.
Yeah, good job.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
So move. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I'll have to abstain because I wasn't at that meeting.
Bob, are you and Jan voting members on the committee?
I don't know. We probably
put
can
my hand
vote on
up.
issues that aren't going to go before the select board. If we're
That's
voting
fair.
on something that's going to go before the select board, we shouldn't vote because we're having two bites at the apple.
That's fair. It'll be the minutes, people.
No, I
Does
don't.
that sound fair?
Yeah.
All right. So now we can get to the real fun stuff. So Haas's house status. So I did do a site visit with Matt Day and Robin, who were at the last meeting. And they were actually very optimistic about how the Haas's house appears right now. We went through it and they only noted maybe two big issues. The first was roof itself. It isn't bad. It's one dent where the tree fell. It's not even this terrible state. It's really just this one small hole that could actually be filled. And that's caused some molding on the side, but it's not like there's this massive cave in. There's no massive amount of water that's poured in. It's actually something that could easily be fixed and save the house essentially from further water damage. And then the second item that they noted was the stormer that was on the second floor. I'd have to get a picture to show it, but it was some addition that was made maybe in like the 70s that allowed the second floor to have a second bathroom. And the way it was built, it actually funnels the water into one specific location where if you were to go through the building, you'll see that that water just focuses down a heavy stream and pretty much did a lot of damage that goes down to the first floor. Again, that stuff can be fixed, but Matt's recommendation was to remove the dormer if the town is doing that, saving the building so that no further damage it has to be done. So those are the two main cost items that he noted. Now that was just him walking through it. He didn't really note any other big ticket items that really are of concern, but if he has more time, if the town wants to go through more of an investigation, then he might find something. But he looked in the basement, he looked on the first floor, second floor, all the way up to the attic, and he said it's a very sturdy building, and those are the only two items, really.
What about the, under the door where there's the, you can see, there's a hole.
Where you can see into the, yeah, a door is covering that.
Oh, okay.
Like a different door is covering that hole.
Okay.
And I remember that was actually there when we actually got the site. So that must have been something strangely from a long time ago.
Yeah.
Who is the inspecting individual you're referring to?
His name is Matthew Day, and he's with
PHI Construction.
Phi Construction. Yes. He's considering to move to Waldeboro at actually one of the neighboring properties. And he actually came to one of the meetings last month, not because of the actual Haas house itself, but he was just curious what we were going to be doing with the site. So we brought up the Haas house, and he said, I'd like to just take a look around. So it was very fortunate timing, I'd say.
I noticed that the public works director had a different opinion. Is he working with some other source of information besides anything this gentleman revealed?
I would have to ask John Daigle what his information was based on and why he determined that. The buildings always seemed that state that I agreed with Matt since we first got it. But John might have a different opinion, and I can get John's opinion by next meeting.
Would Stan be a reasonable person to walk through?
Stan probably hasn't walked through it. I'd have to see what his schedule is like, but Stan probably would be a good person to also walk through the building. That's the code enforcement officer.
I'd like the opportunity that Bob can tell you, I have a number of years of farm and home administration, doing housing rehabilitation work. 7 years of that work, and I wouldn't mind getting a look at the house.
Yeah,
Great.
it's
Somewhere between liability and resource, find that sweet spot.
yeah, no, if you, and this is an open invitation, really, not just to members of the committee, but people in the community as well. If someone does want to visit the site, then they just need to ask me at the town office. I have the key. Well, no, the Historical Society has the key, but I'll get to that in a minute. If someone just wants to visit and look around the house, then all they have to do is ask, and I can set up a time for that.
My concern is we've got nothing in the budget to take care of the house. I mean, it'll just sit there and it'll rot unless we allocate something, some money, from somewhere to take care of it.
Well, and that's where we'd have to see the initial estimate to cover up that bit on the roof so that there's no more water damage. And then what we'd have to do to remove the dormer from the roof, that little attachment. I'm not a good estimate guy. Stan's driving away right now, so I could have asked him, but I can't. Maybe he heard his name and he had to get out of here as soon as he could. But I agree, there is nothing in the budget right now. We don't have anything in the budget for any project we want to do right now. So that's just something that's going to involve research. And Carl here might have an idea when he gets to this site.
There is money squirreled away in some maintenance budgets
Mhm.
for buildings that aren't necessarily being used. We could transfer that over.
I don't control the budgets.
No, I get it. I'm just looking for suggestions from the committee to make to the select board to do something and
Well,
just sit on it.
there's a fundamental question. According to the covenants, we can't do anything with the house. People can't live there, correct?
People can't live there, but we could still repurpose it.
Repurpose it for,
It could be an office, it could be
Yeah.
a storage, it could be a museum.
could this be another AD grade in which the town invests money and then we can't find a use for the building?
That's why scale of the interdiction and the cost of interdiction needs to be delineated very carefully now.
That's why I don't want to say we should commit X dollars to it. I'm just saying, we had an architect walk through it, give his perspective, and he said, the building can be saved. Whether we want to save the building, that's a later question.
I feel like we still don't have a handle on how it can be used. We know no residences, but someone proposed a pub or something or but I think it was probably worth going back to DEP and asking more specific, like, could it be, come up with it, that we could brainstorm a list, could it be used for this, that, and the other thing, before we encourage anyone to think about. putting
Well,
a
the
business
big
in.
issue is water and the water
You
wells,
can never
correct?
use that.
You know, they can't use the water well there just because it's so close to the plume. It may not be impacted by the plume, but it's close to it. But, you know, if we extended the water main up another, I don't know, 200 feet or so, maybe.
It's
I
that
thought they
close.
were on
It's
water.
already on
It's
town.
already
water.
Yeah, it's on town
It's
water.
on town water now.
Yeah, it comes over from Sylvania.
Well, yeah, that would make a lot of sense, Janice, to go and talk to TEP about whether it could be repurposed, since if there's no air issue there, which would, you know, and a chlorinated solvent might have an issue with air pollution, but there's no air issue on this site. The only issue is water. And if they have town water, I don't see why that building couldn't be reused.
Yeah, so, but I'm still not convinced it could be used for, say, a tavern. But it'd be good to know that, you know, that they would allow people to be in there day long, you know, all day long or something, because they can't on anywhere else in the covenant restricted area. And this, am I right that this is in the pending, or is this out of the,
I believe it was out of the pending.
it's out of-
I thought it was.
well, that's good.
Yes.
Yes, it is, so that's good.
Yeah, the pending seemed to be more heading towards the water, if I was
Yeah,
correct on
So
that.
that's good, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to have, you know, if we were to put it on the market or whatever we decide to do, we don't want, we just need clarity there, as clear as we can get it.
There was a pretty specific list of
Things that couldn't be done.
uses that couldn't
Right.
be used, right?
Right.
Was food service one of them?
Because it
I
is a
don't-
cool building.
I
you know.
don't believe food service was in the covenant. I believe the focus was more residential focus
Residential and
say that, or
education.
schools or
couldn't
anything
be a
like that, it
school,
can't.
right.
or
Yeah.
childcare or something
Right.
like that. So,
So maybe
we should
you know,
just
or museum
refer to
or-
that list and
right. Well, and to Mike's point, I can reach out to Max Lewick at the DEP and be sure that food services and commercial activities couldn't be,
Yeah.
or if they even have
Well,
some,
if we can use it. I mean,
or,
Right.
right. Or if there's
people
any
can't use
suggestions.
it, Then
Then-
spending money on it
Right.
makes no sense. That's
Right.
that was my only point.
so we can do both of these at the same time. Check what DEP has to say and make a determination that would be appropriate to the town to,
By next meeting, I would assume I would be able to speak with Max Lewick to
Okay.
discuss these items, and Carl here will go around and maybe he'll have a different opinion, and John Bagel will probably, and Stan Waltz may also have an opinion. That could sway the whole matter.
I'm wondering if, in the meantime, just, we had to do this at the wall, though, we put a plastic tarp over the roof, which was horrible in that case, it wasn't just a little hole, but if we could just do temporary fix while the decision's being
Sure.
made, in case we get the date, you
Something
know, cheap,
in the interim.
yeah.
Mhm.
And even plug up the hole in front of the door, so, you know, rodents and stuff don't get in, you know, just cheap. Spend a couple $100.
Whenever you'd like. Yeah. Two of them.
Yeah, we can discuss this when the meeting's over.
Yes.
And just the other part of it is, I mentioned earlier, I gave the key to the Historical Society, and we've reached out to the Haas's family to see if there's interest in removing some of the possibly historical sentimental items from the buildings. And the Historical Society, I believe, has been working on this. It's going to take quite a while because they're going to have to rummage through everything. And
Oh, so there is content in the building.
there is
Oh.
definitely a lot of content. You'll see that when you see the building.
And
No idea.
architectural content too,
Right.
you know, that if it were demolished, could probably be resurrected, so.
Wanted to save that incubator that was in there for the eggs, and that was the first thing we really wanted to make sure they could get out of there. Yeah, they had an old fashioned one in there.
Wow.
That's Haas's house. So for new business, there's public input and survey. We briefly touched on this last time, but I sent out a quick 10 questions that could be used for potential survey if we want, just to get some public input. We've already discussed some uses that could be happening at the site, but this is to refresh people's memories that Sylvania, there's no determined use at this point, and we do want to get some public input on the matter. How would people like me to go through this? Just go through a question by question and explain my reasoning for the question? Do people just want to go crazy and start saying where they have grievances?
Just one couple, maybe rounding out the purpose a tiny bit more. I mean, some people may not know, for instance, the town owns it now, even though it's been in the news, but they may not be aware of that, you know. But that is not being used for anything at the moment. Just make that explicit.
Oh, I just realized this statement of purpose is not to us. This statement of purpose is.
I'm
to the-
assuming
For
that's
the
right.
survey.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. Well, then, yeah, then you need the who, what, when, where, and why
yeah.
as clearly as possible.
Like an address.
Yeah.
Many people might not know the Haas's house.
Right.
Do you know the town owns this property? You know, if-
I would hope I know the town owns the property right now.
We know you do. But just the who, what, when, where, and why, right up front, and then purpose flows out of that.
And you might even say what we've just
Just-
formed, so people have the kind of a little bit more context.
Could we not just start the survey with a statement instead of asking what they know about the site? And just say the town of Waldeboro has acquired the Haas's house and the Sylvania site,
That's the what.
Yeah.
instead of asking them, do you know about the Haas's? Just give them some information up front about what the overall topic and issue is.
Mhm.
So that they have a context for why we're asking them for their input, and then say, what, here are some potential uses. Do you, or, rate them in order that you would like to see them happen, and then do you have other suggestions? So,
So you saying take out questions 2 and 3 and instead just put in statements that cover.
That's what I would do, and
Yeah,
even 4,
yeah.
it might say there's an
Tell them
environmental
about it, yeah.
covenant that
I agree.
prevents school, residential, just so people know, instead of
Right.
them saying, oh, I think it should be residential housing. And there's just
And-
no point
Right.
in-
you'll get
And-
everything under the
And so
sun.
no one feels like they don't have a right
You wanna
to
work on
an
this?
opinion because they don't know
And
enough
you could
about
even
it,
put a
right?
link to
do
the
you want to work on
website
this?
so that they could look at the
Yeah, I'd be
covenant if
happy to
they
work on
want
it,
it, because
yeah.
of course, nobody's gonna know about the covenant. I mean, maybe 5.
Gail and I
people,
both have years of experience doing this kind of stuff, so if you'd like us to take what you've written here and put together, so you don't have this on top of your other
If you'd like,
duties, we'd be happy to do that.
I have no issue with that. If you want to do that.
Does anybody else have a problem with? us?
No, but
By
I
all
think the other
means, yeah.
questions were good. I mean, that, the other, other than asking what you know. But generally, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Other than 2, 3, 4 and the purpose, were there any other thoughts or additional questions or questions to remove?
I just think it's nice to have either a yes or no answer very easily to collate what the responses are.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you don't have to interpret anything.
Although, what do you think about, like the go-kart idea, for instance, so 1 through 5, or do you think yes or no is, because I feel like some people may be strongly opposed. Sometimes I like a range, but I don't know, I could go. with
Can do that too.
I'm more of a rank guy. There's 5 different things and I can say, this is my top one, this is my second favorite, da, 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 da. Because, and I may have to look at the old recreation survey for when Marcus was looking into the community center, but I feel people really wanted a pool, but also really didn't want a pool. I feel that was one of the results. Just because they were just 2 separate questions, and it was asked, what do you think is the most necessary thing to include? What do you think is the least necessary thing to include? And that's the answers you got.
Okay, interesting.
I think so. I'd have to add, Marcus probably also left, but
Okay.
Well, in some ways, it's nice to have it be quantifiable, so when you put out the results, you can say, 60% wanted X, or however you can, or this was their
Yeah.
first choice, and this was, or however you're gonna do it, but I think that's a good idea.
I guess my only concern was that the ideas that we had on the table were generated absolutely randomly. They were, someone decided they wanted to say something to Julie. Basically, that's how that happened. And I'm a little uncomfortable emphasizing those ideas as this is what we've got. Anything else? I feel like a more open question is appropriate at this point.
Like,
What do you think
open
needs to be there?
space,
Right.
Business.
Right. I noticed the go-karts weren't on here. Arbitrary decision from.
Did I jump on the bandwagon? Sorry.
Well, we could power them with the solar array. Since we can't send the power to the substation.
Well, that could be eventual. I feel like that should be on there.
I do.
Well, the
'Cause it's
solar array has some legs because it's what the committee
something that
initially
the town
recommended,
owns
right?
and generates income for the town, just letting people know some of the different values. It could be, whether it's
Yeah.
financial or
Right.
aesthetic.
And one doesn't exclude the other.
Right,
You
right.
know, that we can do more than one thing with it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's worth mentioning too, the property, the size of the the acreage and the introduction, and that there's and the amount of water frontage it has, and it's on town water, we could maybe give people that information. Yeah, but yeah. So you're gonna have a paper version and a online version, is that the thought, or on the website, you can go answer it.
Well, by doing the online one, there's the comment box. We could try and do that through a physical one, but I'm not sure how much space we'll have to give for a comment comment boxes. Then again, if we're getting rid of 2, 3, and 4, or at least changing it to be statements explaining everything, maybe there's going to be more space. I'm not, yeah.
If you're gonna rank or have a range of things.
I mean, these are committee decisions. I think there's a lot of people in town who could do this online. And for those who can't do it online, we could offer like a phone number or something where someone could come and answer it here at the town office, maybe, or I could.
Or the library.
Or the library, and we give those physical copies out.
I would recommend not worrying about the length. I mean, don't come up with the
Right.
questions first, and then if it goes over 2 pages, so be it, or maybe it can be fit. I know with the Waldo, we did a survey early on, and we did online SurveyMonkey and paper, and we got almost 300 responses. And I'd say, and we put it like at the library, at the town office, places people go, and I can't remember what percentage was what, but it was a significant number and a lot of paper. And there were some answers that was a little harder to, I mean, you can't just use SurveyMonkey and get the nice little graph. We ended up plugging the information into SurveyMonkey from these so that we could do all the, it could do all its statistical stuff. But I'd recommend both personally. I mean, it can't hurt.
I also think it'd be good to do some targeted surveying of the people who live and work down there. Like the bowling alley,
Mhm.
the people who live in the housing development next to it, and some of the other neighbors.
We could probably even give some of the physical copies to the bowling alley and say, when
Right.
people are here, you mind telling
That's a
them the
good
survey's
idea.
going on.
And I'd also be willing to go door to door
Mhm.
to talk to people as well once it's done.
Max, I'm not familiar with a lot of these matters within this municipality. You have a rezoning or conditional use or some sort of land use issue. You have a notification policy for abutters.
Yes.
Or some radius around the site.
When there is a matter going before the planning board for a site review, we put an ad in the paper and we send a physical letter to abutters of the properties, someone who physically abuts it, or if they're across the street, we send it to the people across the street. I think you two actually got it when we were doing the friendship
Yep,
school.
yep.
So we could do something very similar to
Yeah,
that
it
as well.
seems to me that would be, that's sort of the minimum starting point for something community-wide, benefit and cost.
Well, and I think depending on when this gets sent out, and I didn't run the idea by Julie, so hopefully she won't hurt me for making the suggestion. We could probably put a little tab in the mail when we're sending things out, telling people, hey, this survey is going on right now. You can go online, or we can send out a physical copy. So that way we're getting more publicity out there than just,
You mean with the town report you said? What were you saying?
what do we mail out? Is it the tax bill
Well,
or
we're
is it?
gonna mail out absentee ballots. You could,
We're gonna
you
have
could
sent-
include one with that.
We could, yep, there are absentee ballots. I don't know what amount of people are going to be doing absentee ballots this year, but yeah, that would definitely be one. And
The tax bill.
tax bill, that's what I was
They've
thinking.
been gone out. I mean, they'll go out in November again, but
When does the town? report-
September they'll go out, I guess.
So town report's ready by June. But you're talking about the book?
Yeah.
Town, yeah, that's usually done by June.
But
I
that
think.
doesn't get mailed anymore.
That doesn't get
Yeah,
mailed.
so
You just
never
pick them
mind.
up here at the town
That's right,
office.
That's right.
But that's the other thing, depending on, I mean, I don't think we're gonna be that long to get the survey out, but if by some unfortunate chance, we're waiting until June to have this ready for release, then we can just hand it out to people during the actual election. Once people have voted, we just hand them the survey and say, hey, this is about Sylvania.
That's gonna yield a lot more
Yeah.
response,
That's usually,
for sure.
but I don't know how long that's,
Can we
Well, I mean-
publish a link on Facebook as well?
we'll put a link on Facebook. I think we'll probably do an actual press release in the Waldoboro section for Lincoln County News and maybe Courier Gazette if they're fine with it.
Sorry, Jen.
A lot more has to be done.
Well, I mean, if we can shoot for, say, getting it done by early June, I don't know when the town, or maybe before, and then have it be live for a couple months, it doesn't have to.
Right.
So that you have some opportunities to disseminate it, I think that would be good.
Well, if we're gonna look at a more updated version in May,
Or June, early June.
well, I mean, even in just May, we're not approving anything today. So, if we're looking at a new version in May, we might as well just look at it. And if it's ready in May, then we just have it ready for June.
Sure. And if, I don't know, I mean, I'd love to take you two up on or you can work collaboratively, the three of you with.
Someone who wants to do my work for me, I'm fine with
Why
it.
not? And then run it by Max again.
You got other things you gotta do. I know.
But you guys can do it by our next meeting.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah, we'll have it to you well before the next meeting.
Sounds good. And if
you said that, not me.
and I'll send you the Word document version of this so that you have a letterhead on top. If you want.
Excellent. Yep.
All right, so that's, and then, yeah, I had something in the purpose about a future meeting date so that we would discuss these items, but that could just be removed since that's an undetermined thing, but that's it for the survey. And once we get the results for that, we can do a regular meeting or an actual forum to discuss it, like a special meeting day. And yeah. So that's public input and survey. Any other, so last item, comments from the committee. Does anyone just have random thoughts they want to discuss?
I do.
About Sylvania.
Huh?
About Sylvania.
About Sylvania, yes. I actually walked the site last week. And towards the south side of the property, there's a sort of a big canyon, very picturesque, pretty. You're walking through old growth, white pines,
Beautiful
just
forest.
gorgeous.
Very nice.
The north side of the property is brambles. And I tried to walk it, but I got my legs all scratched up and it was really tough. I know everybody wants to have at least a walking path along there. Can we do like a cleanup day and maybe go down there with spray cans and put blazes on trees so you can follow down to the shoreline? And I'd be happy to bring a weed whacker. I've got a good one and a chainsaw, and I can remove down logs. I'd be happy to start on that if DEP would let us and if the committee would have recommended.
DEP's never had an issue with it. And I think the only reason we haven't done it yet is because we reached out to Midcoast Conservancy to do a collaboration with the Conservation Commission. I just don't think I think now that the snow's melted, I think now they're actually probably going to be open to doing that thing. So Conservation Commission meets tomorrow, so I can discuss this.
You know, I'll bet that if you put a notice in the Lincoln County News that there was gonna be a cleanup day for the Sylvania site and, you know, mark some paths and I'll bet you would get a lot of volunteers that would do it. I would do it.
Yeah.
I would certainly help.
That's the
I'd
big
join you.
draw. That's the big draw of Mid-Coast Conservancy and formerly NVLT. Let's go out and work on a trail. Let's go align the trail, you know, in Cahora.
You do that too.
Witherell. Yeah,
Charlie
we-
Witherell, yeah.
Well, I used to design the bicycle and pedestrian paths for Kent County government. That was one of my jobs. But this is different. This is, you get good experienced people who know how to go through the pucker brush
Mhm.
and pick a good alignment and, you know, and use their good judgments.
Yeah,
This was worse than Pucker Park.
Worse
This was almost like, hey, whoa, you can't go through this.
Multiple rows or something that tears your clothes apart.
Oh, yeah, it was blackberries
Oh,
and
yeah,
and
raspberry,
pasture
right.
roses, you know, they were wicked.
Pasture roses.
You know,
It
Rosa
multiplies the
rugosa,
one with
yeah,
the-
a little tiny white.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I recommend we, before we have the community work day, we have someone either from Mid-Coast or maybe you who
Carl.
has done trail
Well,
layouts.
Yeah,
So I'd love-
absolutely.
And then,
I don't know how to do it.
yeah,
I would
know.
love to invite, you know, find the minds that are out there. And I've done some of this work naturally, but most of my work was for ADA adaptive trail path development. I have a feeling we're not talking about adaptive trail development. We're talking about just a good working
Yes.
hiking trail.
That's right.
So, you know, it's a lot more intuitive than you might guess.
yeah.
That is. So we could pull this off ourselves.
And I'll tell you one other thing, the parking lot where you try to get down the berm, it was slippery and muddy. And if we're gonna make like a circuit trail, somebody's gotta lay that out, you know, I had a heck of a time getting up that berm.
Well, maybe that's the first thing we do as a committee is set out a trail down there.
Why don't we all just walk it
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, yeah, and think about the erosion.
get our
and all
resident
that.
trail expert involved.
But I'm gonna put phone calls in with your approval, Ed Cahora and Charlie
And
Witherell.
Charlie, yeah, they'd
Those
go,
fellas have
they'd come.
come up with some nice alignments that ended up being very sustainable
Yeah.
paths. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
with warning signs. The shoes I'm wearing took a beating as I walked down towards the
I've
shore.
gotta see
It was very, very muddy.
It's pretty.
I should have been wearing boots. And if we do take a tour, bring some mudders.
Yeah,
Pretty
we also
steep
have
in
to-
there in some places. isn't
Yeah.
it?
We also have to check with DP on setbacks from the wellheads, because, you know, there's a couple things before any trail's laid out, we have to.
Constraints, yeah.
And
We
do we want to
define-
do it before black fly season?
Well, we got a month.
Yeah,
but it doesn't
we got
last
about a
that
month.
long.
So I'll talk with the Conservation Commission tomorrow about trails, and this will probably be another item we're going to discuss right after the meeting, in addition to Haas's house.
That'd be fun. But I would like, with everyone's endorsement, when we do this, when we physically get on the site, to bring in some folks from the former NVLT.
Oh, yeah.
We spent so much of that time, the Geel and the other preserves, putting together those alignments were very successful, I thought.
Great. Then they're currently the trail committee now, still for a lot of the lands around here.
So the mention of chainsaws made me think of insurance, since this is a town property now.
Yep.
Is the town covered for that kind of?
That's a really good question that I don't have an answer.
Well,
I
the
guess we do
Conservation
have
Commission
insurance on it.
maintains all the trails of the little pocket preserves in town.
Yeah,
As
I'm just curious as to what the liability could possibly be for the town.
I think we usually have Public Works deal with some of the bigger items and the chainsaw work.
Okay.
I believe, but I can check with that.
I just don't want to have it.
Understood. And, you know, my wife's on the board and I'm a volunteer for CHIP. And basically, if you're a volunteer, you take the responsibility on yourself.
Yourself,
The town
okay.
has very little liability, I think.
Okay.
You have a standard hold harmless agreement for events that the town undertakes.
I believe we do, but
Yeah.
I think everyone else in the town office.
Well, your recreation department will certainly have one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Certainly. That needs to be adapted. Your solicitor might want to take a look at that.
No problem. You do that through Julie.
That's good housekeeping before we do actually have volunteers. Very good point.
Any other thoughts from the committee?
Thank you for your work, Max.
All right, the next meeting is scheduled for May 2nd at 4:30 PM. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Second, all those in favor? All those opposed?